In today's video, we're continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series. Today, we're looking at the 31st ranked team for the NHL's regular season, the Columbus Blue Jackets. What will they be expected to do this offseason? What expiring contracts do they have? And can they get back to being more competitive and compete for playoffs next year? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're continuing on with our offseason plan series. Today we're looking at the Columbus Blue Jackets. So in case you're new to this series, here's a quick rundown of how it's going to work. We're first going to recap the 22-23 season, take a look at how things went, some key team stats, take a look at our salary cap space, just kind of revamp a little bit of what we've seen from this team in the past year, take a look at what contracts they have expiring, so what business do they have internally to consider doing, and what are their main pressing off-season needs that they need to address to be better for next year. So let's first up start with the Jackets 22-23 season recap. It was not a good season, as we know. They're 31st ranked team in the NHL, just shy of being dead last in the NHL Prospects. Bodes well for getting a high draft pick, but certainly not fun in terms of wins and losses for the fan base to endure. They finished with a record of 25-48-9 for 59 points. Just an ugly season overall, but they also had a ton of man games lost. This team was decimated by injuries like we haven't seen in a long time. Like they you name it, they dealt with it this year. It's pretty crazy in that front, which did play a role. Obviously, I think the other part of this is just that the team obviously needs a lot of work to be better. But yes, they're good players. They do have. Most of them did deal with a lot this year, which certainly played a big factor here. They were one of the lowest scoring teams in the league, 30th overall, 214 goals for. One of the worst for defensive metrics, giving up 330, which was 31st in the NHL for a total team plus minus of minus 116. So that's certainly not good at all. The power play was weak at 18.3 for 26 best, and the penalty killing wasn't great either, 75.1% for 25th best. So overall, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot that went right in Columbus this year. Once the season concluded, they announced that head coach Brad Larson was fired and dismissed from coaching, so he will not be behind the bench next year. And they're obviously going to be looking for a new head coach, which we'll discuss here in a later part of the video. Like I said, it was also a tough season goaltending-wise. They had themselves a good goalie with Elvis Merzlikins, who signed a long-term deal, which is about to kick in here, and he just did not get off to a good start. His season was poor. Like I said, their team was decimated by injuries, and overall, just everything you can imagine went wrong. Now, from a salary cap perspective, they are going into the offseason in decent shape. They don't have a lot of internal business to take care of, but given where they are in the standings, they're not in the same situation as teams like Anaheim or Chicago, for example, who have even a lot more cap flexibility than they do. So right now, going into the 2023-24 season, the Jackets have $64.1 million tied up in contracts, which covers 16 NHL players. So that gives them $19.3 million available. Of course, that is factoring in that the NHL increases the salary cap by $1 million this offseason. All of those numbers coming from CapFriendly.com. And CapFriendly right now has it in as a $1 million increase because that's all we know for sure that's guaranteed. It is a remote possibility that the cap could change by more than that if the NHL and the NHLPA find a way to agree on that. But it seems a little bit unlikely, and we're not going to bank on it for sure. I'm sure NHL teams aren't either when it comes time to kind of planning ahead on what they're going to do. So $19.3 million worth of cap space. Almost like a team near the basement doesn't really want to be a cap team, at least not until they're ready to compete. You wouldn't think they need to have some wiggle room, but they don't have a lot of internal business to take care of, like I mentioned. So they do have options here to try to retool a bit on the fly, which I know is something GM Jarmo Kekalainen certainly would like to do. Let's take a look, though, at their internal business when it comes to restricted and unrestricted free agents. Who do they have on expiring contracts in this organization? Well, first up on the RFA side, they only have two. They have Matthew Olivier and Tim Bernie. If those are players they decide they want to qualify and keep, they're not going to be overly expensive to do so, so that should be pretty easy to take care of. On the UFA side, they have Blade Peterson, who's actually a Group 6 free agent, which means he's hitting free agency early, because he didn't get enough games played to be an RFA, which gets him to UFA status sooner. Also, defenseman Gavin Bayreuther, goalies John Gillies, and Michael Hutchison. So those are all players that I don't know if the CBJ wants to retain those guys or not. But if they do, they're not going to be expensive. Peterson and Baber, they might offer a cheaper contract too. The goalies, I would suspect, probably don't come back. Goaltending was a major issue this year for this team, and I think they'll probably be looking for other opportunities, internally and externally to fill both the NHL and AHL spots. So not a whole lot of business there to take care of amongst expiring contracts. That's the good news. I guess the bad news in a sense, though, is that when you're coming off a season where you're almost dead last in the NHL, that means you have a lot of players already under contract, right? So certainly some guys that need to bounce back. But let's take a look at what their most pressing offseason needs are. What are the top burning questions facing this franchise as their full offseason gets underway here since they didn't make the playoffs? Well, first up, they need a new coach. That's probably pretty high on the agenda here for GM Jarmo Kekalainen. You take a look at Brad Larson. Of course, he was in the organization for several years, both as an assistant and a head coach. Worked in the minors, of course, before. I would say, based on him being a first-time head coach at the NHL level, based on how things went, I'm going to suggest that they're probably going to go with a more experienced coach. That would be my guess here. There's some that feel that Washington coach, a former Washington coach, I should say, Peter Laviolette, would be a great fit and could be high up on Kekalainen's wish list when it comes to meeting candidates and offering a position to somebody, like I said, with more NHL experience. There's certainly a few other names out there that they could turn to. I mean, he's the only name I've really heard through the rumor mill as being a good fit. He obviously just left Washington within like 24 hours or so of Larson being let go. Since the season's ended, we have only seen a few coaches not be back. Dallas Inc. being one, Larson, Laviolette, to name a few here. So obviously there could be more, but it's unlikely that we'll see very many at this point, given unless teams that made the playoffs decide to make changes if they don't like what they've seen early on and they get bounced earlier than they were hoping for. But certainly a new coach is huge. I mean, they have to make sure they get the right guy. Kekalainen's been there a long time. I'm sure he's going to want to make sure he gets this right. Of course, they had John Tortorella previously for a long time. Very different kind of coach. So I think they're going to probably want something maybe a little bit in between Tortorella and Larson. It's quite a drastic change there. So Laviolette might be one of those guys that might be a good fit. We'll see. I don't know if he'll be the guy, but I do understand that he would make some sense. Of course, a big part of their offseason as well is going to be the 2023 NHL Draft. They're guaranteed a top 4 selection. Being the number 2 team from the bottom of the standings means that if it went by standings, you'd be picking second overall. Of course, that's not how it works. The top 2 teams are lottery picks. If they're fortunate to win one of those, they'll pick first or second. If not, they can bump down to either 3 or 4, depending on who wins those lottery spots. So, of course, right now the Ducks have the best odds. The Jackets have the second best odds. If neither one of those teams win, then they'll move down 2 spots. If one of those teams wins, one doesn't. If that Anaheim wins and another team wins, they'd get bumped down to 3rd. So they're getting a really good player here. But I'm sure that, like any team that's in the mix, they would love to be number 1 and get Connor Bedard. Connor Bedard would be a franchise-altering player for them. Obviously, they have a lot of good talent there already. They have some good things to build around. But like I said, they're also missing some good pieces. You start in the net, you have Elvis Verslikins. If he can bounce back, that would be huge. I mean, part of the coaching staff as well, they did let go of the goalie coach. They need to make sure they bring in a guy who can help Elvis find his game and get back to being what they thought he could be when they signed him to this long-term deal. That is going to be absolutely huge. To move on from a goaltender who's struggling on a long-term deal is almost impossible. So they're going to be stuck with Elvis for a little while. They might as well, it's important and vital that they find a way to help him get back to what he can be. So they obviously need to be very careful with the goaltending coach selection and make sure that happens. If they can do that, they do have some good defensemen led by Zach Werenski, who did miss a big chunk of the season. Now is a big blow to this team as well. Obviously, they have some good young forwards. They signed Johnny Gaudreau as an unrestricted free agent last summer to go in with their young guys. They have guys like Cole Sillinger. They have Kent Johnson. And there's more coming. They have Chinnikov and others that are going to be important pieces to this group. Plus, they're going to be adding a top player, whether it be Connor Bedard or Adam Fantilli or Leo Carlson or any of these guys that are at the top part of this 2023 NHL Draft. No matter what, at least they know they're getting an excellent pick. They also have more draft currency as well. They have the first-round pick of the Los Angeles Kings as well. Hard to say where that's going to be. Might be somewhere around that 16 to 20 range. So certainly that's a spot where they might move the pick. If they can find a good player that can help them now, especially someone who's younger. Like, for example, last year at the draft, we saw a pretty substantial trade involving Montreal, Chicago, and the New York Islanders. Essentially, the Islanders sent their first-round pick to the Montreal Canadiens for Romanoff, and then they flipped that pick to the Blackhawks for Kirby Dach. So ultimately, like, you see guys like Romanoff and Dach moving teams, like, that's probably your age bracket they're looking at. Somebody who's got a little bit of NHL experience, somebody who might be looking to be able to, the team might be looking to move them for whatever reason. Like, if they can get somebody under 25, ideally, who can play a top 6 role for that first rounder, if there's something out there that's available that makes sense for them, that's probably what they're going to be looking to do. I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that they get a top, 2, 3, 4 defenseman, honestly. I think they're still confident that Werenski could be a number 1, but he could use more help there as well. So certainly, they do have some good prospects coming up, but they can find somebody who can play now or whatever. Like, either way, that draft pick is going to likely get moved to be acquiring a player that can help them right away. And they also have, besides that, enough other draft picks that we might be seeing some other moves. They could be an active team at the draft, but that would be the main deal that I would suggest that they would likely do. But we've heard comments from Jarmo Kekalainen say he wants to get back to being competitive. They're not really rebuilding right now. They're definitely kind of in a retool situation. I don't really think they ever expected to be where they are this year. Like I said, I think part of it is the fact that the team maybe wasn't as good as they thought it was, but a lot of it was injury related. So I'll be really, really curious to see a healthy Blue Jackets team with a few tweaks, how much better they could be next year. They're in a really, really tough division though, so that's not going to be easy. But again, the draft will be a time to really see just how active they could be. Now, it may or may not happen around the draft, but it is heavily suspected that they're going to probably trade for a top 6 center. There's a lot of talk that they could be going after Kevin Hayes out of Philadelphia. We know the Flyers would love to move him. He had a good year this year. He can still be productive. Good friends and former college line mate of Johnny Gaudreau. I mean, a duo that gets reunited there in the NHL and actually, gels well and has good success. Obviously, they're thin at center. Hayes is maybe not a long-term number 1 guy, but he's somebody who could be a good placeholder for a couple of years and help, be there to help develop the younger guys. I mean, they don't have a lot in that aspect, right? So Hayes could come in. Philly might retain a little bit of money, enough to make it worth their while, because obviously they'll have to look at a buyout, look at a retention trade. I don't think there'll be a whole lot going back the other way. I think they can get Hayes for either future considerations or something really small. So again, I think that's a trade that seems likely that we're going to see. There are some NHL insiders that are convinced that it's already been agreed to and it'll be executed later, but we'll find out about that if that's true or not. Of course, they're getting Alex Texier back, which is going to be nice. Texier played over in Swiss last year, and he is making the jump back to North America. Obviously, he played over there for family reasons. I don't know the whole story, but either way, he's coming back to Columbus, and he's a good player, which will help as well. So if you can add guys like Hayes, you can add guys like Texier, you get a top pick, that, and then you get the LA pick. If they can turn the LA pick into a really good forward, and then you trade for Hayes, let's say, and you don't have to give up much of anything, you get Texier back, and then if your top pick makes the team right away, that's 4 really good players you've added without really giving up a whole lot. That could be a nice boost for them right there. But like I said, they also need to get the right coaching staff in place to make it all work. They need to get Elvis back on playing well, and that will be absolutely tremendous for them. They do have a lot of good prospects right now. I don't know how many of these guys get roster spots next year or how many keep playing in the minors, but they still got guys like Cole Sillinger who didn't have a full season as well. He could bounce back next year. You still got David Jiricek, Desmond Chaychuk, Chinnikov, who could still be really good players for you. And of course, Patrick Laine. They have to get this guy figured out. They experimented with him at center as well, and he seems interested in learning it as well, which I find odd because he's never really done it, but he seemed to like it enough and he wants to learn more. I'll be curious to see if they proceed with that experiment or if they can just put him on the wing and get him. But they need to find a way for Patrick Laine to be that 35 to 40 goal guy and earn the contract that he's getting paid and really be that player that he was when he was drafted that he showed for a while in Winnipeg. That's another part that's going to be huge. A lot of underperforming players on this team combined with injuries really just completely wrecked the season. Though, can they bounce back? I think they could do a handful of moves like I just showed you to really make some adjustments on this roster to get a fresh look, get a fresh coaching staff in place, and this team should at least be able to bump up next year. Can they get into the playoffs, though, when you got teams like their Devils and the Hurricanes and the Rangers all ahead of you? Obviously, the Flyers are going to be a team that's, you should be able to compete with. The Islanders are going to be tough, as well. So, the Penguins and Capitals are still in there. They might be the teams you might be able to pass, maybe, depending on what they do. But they're going to be making moves to be aggressive to get back in it, too. So, it's tough to say. They're in a tough spot and a tough division. They're going to proceed cautiously here and see what they can do. But let me know what you expect from the Jackets this offseason. And can they get back to playoffs next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. There'll be lots more videos coming in this series, as well as all the news and rumors of all 32 NHL teams from around the league. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.